Welcome into the Five Guys here on the Five Reasons YouTube channel. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on the Five Reasons Sports. We got Alex Donno as usual. You can follow him at Alex Donno. We've got plenty of other content on the channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, turn the notifications on. Did a crossover with Miami Heat Beat last night. That's on there, as well as a podcast of Five on the Floor that I did with Alex Toledo. So for your Heat content, this is the place to go. Also tonight, Will Manso will be joining Five on the Floor. So we'll have an episode with Will that'll go up on the channel overnight as well. So again, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Before we get to today's topic, we're sponsored here today by our friends over at Better Edge. You can find them at betteredge.com. That's with an O, or you can go to betteredge.com and use the code 5RSN. That gets you $20 to play. That's the number 5RSN. Or 5 Reasons. That's the number 5 Reasons. Also gets you $20 to play. This is legal in the state of Florida. Big advantage to Better Edge over the other book that you may be familiar with is that here you can find the line that you want. So they have markets, so you can play whatever line that you can find there, not just the one. Of course, the main line is the Heat are 4.5-point underdogs against Philadelphia on Wednesday night in the play-in, but the other play-in games are also up. The Bulls are a favorite over the Hawks, Pelicans over the Lakers, and the Kings are actually underdogs at home against the Warriors. But you can flip the lines and you can find what you're looking for on Better Edge. Also, we've got a contest on Better Edge. We're going to be giving away some T-shirts. It's free, so just check it out. It's on the Five Reasons Twitter feed. 10 play-in questions, and whoever gets the most points related to that, the two top will get free shirts from us. Anything that we have on our store. So check it out, betteredge.com. Use the code 5RSN. All right, let's get to it, Dono. Plenty of content here, and we wrote a provocative title on this one, and people are going to react to that. And basically, is this the end of the Heat's Jimmy build? And as I say that, I want to preface this by the Jimmy build has been a success, in my view. Like, you're talking 5 years into it, you got 5 playoff appearances, you've got 3 conference finals, you've got 2 NBA finals, and you might have punched your ticket to win one of them, at least if, say, Bam and Dragic don't get hurt in the bubble. I don't know that anything would have changed last year, but if Josh Hart doesn't take out Jimmy's ankle, it's just interesting to me that the Knicks have become the arbiters of Knick fans have become the arbiters of dirty play when literally the Heat's championship run ended because of Josh Hart last year. But
Yeah.
it's a success under any circumstances. But as with all builds, they evolve, they change, and sometimes they need to be abandoned. So I'll go to you on this. We've seen kind of a Zoe build in the late 90s, which there was a pivot in 2000, and then he got sick, and so they never got to see it to fruition. There was the Wade Shaq build. There was the Big Three build. This is the Jimmy build. In your view, at this stage, has this build exceeded your expectations?
Oh, 1000%, Ethan. And listen, I know that certain Heat fans will say it's not truly a success if you don't win a championship because we've been spoiled for, the last almost 20 years with the run in '06 and then the Big Three era where when they weren't winning championships, they were still making it to the finals. So I know some Heat fans may say like close but no cigar, but I go back to really, I was around when the franchise was formed, but I started really caring in around 1992. So I've been around since the pre Pat Riley era, and I would say that this Jimmy build is, you could argue it's the second or third best era of Miami Heat basketball in the history of this franchise, right? The Big Three clearly was number one. You can have a debate, as we did last week, about the Shaq Wade era, but which did get you a championship. It didn't last nearly as long. I mean, the two of them together, Shaquille O'Neal was only here for 3.5 years, and only like one and a
Right.
half of those were really good years when Shaq was here with Wade. So I look at
Right.
the longevity. I look at Jimmy himself has exceeded my expectations, right? Because
Hmm.
I know that, I knew Jimmy was a great NBA player, but I thought he reached heights here in Miami that he had never reached in any of his previous stops, because I do think Jimmy, in a lot of ways, I know he can be a little bit abrasive at times, but in a lot of ways, I feel like Jimmy is one of those quintessential Heat culture guys. And you've had, 2 finals runs where you punched above your weight. You didn't quite get that NBA championship. But success throughout the Eastern Conference, knocking a lot of teams out of the playoffs. Hello, Boston, that you really had no business on paper knocking out. Milwaukee, same thing. So, yeah, honestly, this build has exceeded my expectations. But from where I'm coming from, Ethan, you don't want to stay at that party for too long, because at a certain point, you start to realize that, okay, we
Mm.
probably already reached the peak of the Jimmy build, and we're coming along the downside. So, do we keep the party going for a couple more years just because, or do we start to really now start to think about and take a look at the long-term future of this franchise? And maybe that is best spent in a different direction. So if I can turn this over to you real quick,
Mm.
if the Heat were to actually, let me make one more point before I turn it back to you, okay? Because it's interesting how we're kind of talking about the Jimmy build as if it might already be over. But I mean, can you imagine if the Heat are able to turn a play in into a playoff run? And playoff Jimmy, if he is able to flip that switch that we've talked about him flipping so many times in the past, I wonder if that narrative can even be changed within the next several days. So
Hmm.
we'll have to revisit this topic, even later this week, because the next time we'll be on is the day after that Sixers game coming up. I'm sure we'll have to revisit this topic. But so I'll turn it around to you, Ethan. If the Heat were to decide that the Jimmy build is over, what would happen next? How
Right.
would you move on from Jimmy, and what sort of transaction could you pull there? Like, what would that look like?
Well, I like your party analogy because this happens with all builds, and particularly when they're led by a particular player, which is, and we'll get to the comments. And again, we appreciate all the comments that come in here, particularly on the super chat. Um, it's kind of like going to a party, and then all of a sudden, the drinks are watered down, but they start charging more for them, right? That's kind of what NBA builds are like, right? So you end up paying players for what they did instead of what you're expecting them to do. And this is not just a Heat thing. This is what the Lakers had to deal with Kobe. And everybody forgets all this because obviously his unfortunate passing and all of that. But at the time, there was a lot of controversy about what Kobe did to the franchise by having to pay him at the end. And they went through some lean times there, and it took them a little bit of while to kind of get themselves back together. And we had the same debate with Dwayne. We have these debates all the time. Some organizations are able to handle it where they transition, like for instance San Antonio with Duncan, Dirk with Dallas, where they're able to pay the guys, but it doesn't sort of restrict other things that they're doing. And in some cases, Dirk, for instance, took less money for several years towards the end. Dwayne did until, again, he wanted to get paid at the very end. And then the Heat, paid Whiteside and all the rest of that. And then Dwayne had to leave and come back. So that's kind of what happens with these builds. And that's kind of what I'm afraid of with specifically with Jimmy, because I think what we're seeing here is someone who, everything is being put on the playoffs, right? Like it's
Right.
okay, you play 50, you play 55, you play 60, you play maybe 15 to 20 of them at peak intensity just to be ready for the playoffs. Well, then if that's the case, you have to be a top 5 player in the playoffs. It's not worth it to spend $50 million on someone who is putting you in a position basically, where you have to crawl out of a hole every year. And because other players on the team take their intensity level, they take their energy, they take their seriousness about the regular season from their best player. And that's the thing. You never had to worry about this with LeBron in Miami. You knew he was going to want to play 75 plus, and that's just the nature of it. Now he was younger then than Jimmy is now, and I think we need to accept that. But
Yeah.
you either have to have a structure where, and we got a comment in here from Moises about Tyler Hero time. You either have a structure where others can ascend, okay, or you bring in others to help that star player. And I know people talk about that with what could have happened maybe with Dame or others this offseason. Or you need to look at a totally different build. I'm here with it. Okay. I'm not calling for them to trade Jimmy Butler. I don't think that's what you do, and I don't think you would get fair value. But I
That's the
do think
thing. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
do think, Alex, you need to seriously assess, okay, if they go out sad here, right? If they go out sad where they either they lose either in the both they lose both play-in games, or they lose in 4 or 5 games to Boston. I mean, I think you need to have a serious reevaluation of, okay, are we going to give Jimmy Butler a 2-year extension at the max? Because it's not going to get better. It doesn't get better
No.
with guys when they get older. Okay, they go that they can try to maintain their bodies, and LeBron is the exception to everything. Still playing at a level where he's giving you 25, 7 and 7. It does not get better, and so if they don't have others waiting in the wings to take over, and I don't know that they do. They have good players in Bam and Tyler. They've got promising players in Jaime and Nico, but I don't know that they have that. Then I do think you need to you seriously evaluate everything. And to me, I would say a 1-year extension for Jimmy is probably as far as I would go.
Yeah.
I don't think you can tie yourself in, especially with a 79-year-old team president, uh, to a build where you're counting on him in some ways to carry you at that financial figure when he's just not capable or willing to do it anymore.
Yeah. So, I mean, if he were to sign a 2-year extension, what would that take him to? 36, 37? Is he 34 now?
He's
And
34 right now, but then they seems
34
to be
now?
ripping up the 1 year and then going out again. And I didn't think he was a
Yeah.
guy who
Yeah.
was going to want to play till he was 40. He has so many outside interests, and look, those outside interests are going to
Yeah.
pull on him more and more. He can make a lot of money after basketball, and it's a lot less stressful. He likes the competitive thing, but he can find competition in other ways. I think if you were to ask them seriously, what they would hope for would be for Bam and Tyler to have taken a step this year where they were comfortable kind of turning the franchise over to them, even if Jimmy was here. I
Yeah.
don't think we saw that this year because Tyler's unavailability and the limitations of his game, and honestly, the limitation of Bam's game offensively, and everything they ask him to do defensively. It does seem to drain on him on the offensive end, where we've seen his shot attempts go down month after month after month. Um, this is to me a really important week for the Heat. Because you can't justify all the missed time from Jimmy and others if it ends up causing you to go out in the play-in or go out in five
Right.
games to Boston. They should not be in this position, honestly.
Well, my big thing is if you throw out the hypothetical of something that very well could happen. I don't really want it to happen. That would be give Jimmy the 2-year extension at the max, because to me, at that point, it really becomes more about doing right by Jimmy than doing right by the fan base is the thing.
Mm.
So it's like, hey, we feel like we owe this guy because he's been here. He's had a number of productive seasons here, and we've had the great moments, the playoff Jimmy, the NBA Finals run. So we want to take care of him. And I know there's two sides to that coin, because I know the Heat front office takes pride in the way they take care of their players and in the loyalty
Mm.
card, and they feel like that gives them a lot of equity when it comes to the future moves that they make. So I get it. But in the case of the fan base, I think the message that would send is, we're going to be continuing to build our franchise for at least the next couple of years around someone who is still can be great, but cannot be consistently great, and is probably not capable at that salary at taking us where we need to go. So it does send that message to our fans, for better or for worse, that we're doing right by Jimmy, and we're kind of
Mm.
prioritizing his needs and his wants before really prioritizing trying to make this team into a championship contender. So I think that is something worth thinking about. And I think that at certain points in time, people would have been willing to make that sort of a sacrifice for Dwayne Wade. Obviously, you talk
Mm.
about Kobe in Los Angeles. Like, not every, but a lot of Lakers fans were
Right.
okay in making that sacrifice for Kobe. I'm not sure if as many Heat fans would be on board in making that kind of a sacrifice for Jimmy.
Well, and the other thing about it, Alex, is there are optics that go beyond it, right? So it's not just about doing right by Jimmy, but it's also they've spent the last 8 years digging out from the hole that they didn't take care of the best player in franchise history. I would say the most important player in franchise history. And so they overcorrected. We talked about this on the Heat Beat crossover last night. They overcorrected at first by signing a bunch of kind of slightly above average players like a Dion Waiters or a James Johnson to these 4-year contracts at good money when they could have just found those guys. And now they've moderated since, where I think when you saw with them let Struess and Vincent go, that they've kind of learned their lessons from that. But it's different with Strus and Vincent than it is with Jimmy Butler. Jimmy would bring us right back to the same conversations that we had in 2016 and 2015, where they sort of punted on it by giving Dwayne the 1 year at 20 million, and then in 2016 ended up pissing him off, and then he essentially left for less money to go to Chicago. They don't want to be in that position again. You don't want to be the franchise that doesn't take care of your own, but it is tricky. It is tricky. And I do think at this point, people are going to say Jimmy doesn't owe the Heat anything. They should have gotten him more help. He's exceeded his contract. I think Jimmy does owe them something this season. I do. I think Jimmy owes them maximum effort from here on out, because
Yes,
they tolerated everything this year. Okay. They tolerated everything. They treat him with different rules than they even treated LeBron. Stays in separate hotels sometimes. Okay. He doesn't
yeah,
do media. All these concessions, again, they're in the big picture, they don't mean a lot. But
yeah,
they have done all this stuff just to say, okay, just be ready when it matters. So now it's when it matters. And I think that, to me, just as we talk about Tyler on a lesser scale, has something to prove here, right? Can he stay healthy? Can he be productive in the playoffs? Bam has something to prove, that he doesn't shrink in these moments, all that. Jimmy, I said yesterday, has the most to prove, because he has to be in a position where he can elevate now that they've created the conditions for him to elevate, right? Like, again, haven't put the burden on him during the regular season. They don't call out their stars. They don't do any of that kind of stuff. They let him play by different rules. Okay, now go. If he doesn't go this week, okay, if he doesn't go against Boston, then I do think you need to evaluate everything. It does not mean that you salary dump Jimmy. It doesn't mean that none of that stuff. But I do think that they need to there'll be a serious conversation about whether you can give a 2-year max. That's what I think. I think it starts there and kind of builds back from that. All right, when we come back, after our sponsor here, we'll get into what we do expect tomorrow night. Again, I have a certain expectation of somebody who I do think has to come through tomorrow, beyond just Jimmy. Before we do, a word from our sponsor.
Oh, hold on 1 second.
Oh,
Here we go.
Hey, it's Ethan Skolnick for the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We've got a great new sponsor that fits with us perfectly. It's called jerseys305.com. That's jerseys305.com. This is your home for dead stock and vintage jerseys from the Heat, Panthers, Dolphins, Marlins, and the other local teams. Their mission was born from a passion for wearing jerseys of the old styles and the past players. Jerseys 305 aims to make every fan stand out from the crowd with unique pieces that you don't commonly see anymore. Maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, but not today. And Jerseys 305 was created by the fans, for the fans. They're diehards just like you. In fact, they're probably listening to this episode right now. So check them out, Jerseys 305, their partnership with 5 Reasons Sports, celebrating with a 10% discount on the next purchase using the code 5 at checkout. Unlock your exclusive savings on the entire vintage collection.
All right, make sure you guys check that out. Also, as I said, make sure you enter the Better Edge contest. I mentioned that Will Manso is going to be on 5 on the floor tonight. Actually, he just tweeted a video that Jimmy Butler is the last guy there taking shots today at practice. So
Okay.
that's
See, playoff Jimmy. I'm hoping that tomorrow, I'm hoping Wednesday, Jimmy makes our entire conversation look silly by the end of tomorrow.
I agree. I mean, I think that this is we've hit a point now where there's another prove it moment. I mean, that's it. Like, if you want to say you're deferring all the prove it moments during the regular season, none of this stuff matters. Okay. Well, here we are. Because they should not be in this position. You should not have to be going to Philadelphia. Look at the teams that finished ahead of them. Okay. Look at the teams that finished ahead of them. New York didn't have Randall for 2 months. Cleveland was beat up for 2 months. Orlando is a young team that still, in my view, has holes. They play very good defense, but they need more scoring wings. There's a whole bunch of things I think that they need to fill out that roster. Indiana was not supposed to be ahead of Miami at this stage of development, whether they got Siakam or not. They are where they are. It's because of all of them, from the coach on down. The coach, the star player, the role players, guys sitting out, Hero getting hurt, not taking certain games seriously, the Washington loss, the Memphis loss, the blowing the lead in New York, the dropping the game in Brooklyn that they didn't seem to care about. All of these things, okay? They are where they are. Okay, fine. So I keep getting told by the front office, well, next week we'll know who we have to play and what we have to do and what we have in front of us, and our guys will know how to handle it. Okay, handle it. And it starts with your star. But Alex, I'm going to this. I actually think we're talking a lot about Jimmy. I don't think it's about scoring 30, 35, 40. I don't even know if he's capable of that at this stage. I think it's just about him and his energy. I think it's getting
Oh
out in the
yeah,
passing lanes. I
yeah.
think it's setting up other guys because I think the guy who probably leads them in scoring tomorrow is Tyler Hero. And I think and Brady said this today on his tweet, and I agree with him. They're going to load up on Bam and Jimmy early. And Tyler is going to have opportunities. I think, especially if Rozier is not 100%, we'll get more of a report on that today, or doesn't play. And if Duncan doesn't play, Tyler's usage is going to be through the roof. And okay, we talk about another prove it moment. So I'll go to you on this. Is there anything Tyler can do during this postseason to prove that essentially he can be Jimmy's sidekick offensively? Because I don't think it's Bam. That he can be Jimmy's sidekick offensively. So as Jimmy continues to decline, which is just human nature going to happen, that Tyler is a guy who can pick up the slack and they don't have to go get somebody else.
Well, the most important thing he can do is stay healthy. I mean, when was the last time he did that during a postseason run? So that's number one. Like the bare minimum with me with Tyler, and I know like I can't blame a player for all of his own injuries. I know that stuff happens, but Tyler's been extremely unlucky and extremely snake bit. So he's got to stay healthy and available. That's number one. And to what you were talking about, Tyler, and I know he's capable of this, absolutely has to take on that scoring load because Jimmy is going to demand extra attention. And it's not always in Jimmy's nature to score 35, 40 points every single night. I need Jimmy to be the active, engaged two-way player that he can be in the playoffs. Like I need him to really lock down opposing superstars with his defense. And Tyler's really the guy who needs to pick up the scoring, in my opinion. But bare minimum, he's got to stay healthy. Okay. And yeah, I thought this was this point here from Arthur Jams really made me think. He says, doesn't Jimmy have the leverage to say, quote unquote, I want the max just based off the playoff success following his arrival? I'd wonder what the counter would be. Well, Ethan, I asked myself a fundamental question. When you're talking about the next contract you sign, should signing your next contract be based on things you've already accomplished, or should it be based on what the organization thinks you're going to accomplish for the next couple of years? I lean more towards the latter. And I know it can be a cruel world sometimes, but I think the organization has to ask themselves, whatever sum of money we need to pay Jimmy, is that going to be justified, not based on what he's already done, but based on what he's going to do in the future?
Well, yeah, and that is the fundamental question we came into this episode with. So I'm glad it was asked that way. Look, the NBA, like I said, you're typically paid for what you've done, not at least as much as what they think you're going to do. And especially when there's an optics situation like the Heat are dealing with, as I mentioned with Wade, and especially when you're dealing with a difficult personality like Jimmy. I mean, that's the other thing. Like, if you don't max him for 2 years, how happy is he going to be? Is his effort going to wane even more during the regular season? These are things that organizations need to take into account. I mean, I know we're going to do a bunch of episodes on the Dolphins side whenever that Tua extension is signed because it's coming. And the thing with Tua is, you're paying him based on not so much what he's done, but what you're expecting him to do. But also, you're paying him based on the difficulty of finding a replacement.
Yeah.
That's what it really is with NFL quarterbacks, right? It's okay if we don't you have to pay him Burrow money or Herbert money or this kind of money because regardless of whether or not you think he's better or worse or whatever, how many years are we going to take developing somebody else to take his place? And what is the opportunity cost of that? And what is the comparison cost to how much of the cap this is going to take and how much of this we can defer? And this is the leader of your franchise. And if you don't pay the leader of your franchise, these are all things that the organization have to take into account. But I will say this, okay? If Jimmy Butler wants a 2-year max, we'll go out play Tyrese Maxey tomorrow night. Because Tyrese Maxey is going for the max of what he can receive. It's not the same amount. He's going for the max of what he can receive. Doesn't mean you have to outscore him. It means you need to outplay him. And this comes back to this point, which is that during the regular season, okay, there were only about 5 to 7 games that you can argue that Jimmy Butler was clearly the best player on the floor. I'm not talking about just for the Heat, but the best player on the floor. And very few of those games, if any, were against good teams, were against top 5 defenses, were against top playoff teams. You look at the 5 teams in the top of the Western Conference, which they lost all 10 games to those 5 teams. There was not a single one of them that he was the best player on the floor. Okay, so are we just giving a pass for that? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with giving a pass for it because of what he's accomplished, but not now. Not
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
When they when they're doing the playoff Jason stuff, I mean, I don't believe that Jason Tatum is going to show up in a way that Jimmy Butler doesn't because I have never seen it before. But if he does, after kind of the sleepwalk through the regular season, it's hard to make a case that this can be your 1A getting paid $55 million or whatever it is per year. And Aaron Andrews comes in with a comment here. He better not pass up layups 3 or 4 times for an open Highsmith 3. I'm fine with making the right play, but there is a distinction between making the right play and being a passive player. LeBron made a lot of right plays that he got criticized for in Miami, passing to Haslam in Utah. Everybody remember that one? There were a bunch of
Yeah.
them. But he was not a passive player. He was not a passive player. You didn't have to worry about was LeBron going to show up except for the 2011 NBA Finals? Okay. But beyond that, you did not have to worry about whether or not he was going to show up. You haven't had to worry about it with Jimmy in the playoffs. In fact, I even looked, Alex, at the 2021 series. He was just exhausted. They were all exhausted. They were spent. Okay. There's no reason to be exhausted this time. He got they had it. Yes, they played till June, but they had a full off season after that. He hasn't played 60 games in the regular season. He hasn't played more than 20 of them really hard. He's got to go now. So I understand people are going to say, you're not being hard enough on Tyler and Bam. They need to do what they need to do also. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not letting them off the hook, but we're putting this in the context of the Jimmy build. And the Jimmy build, and I'll let you close, Alex, builds to this. It builds to this week. Go get us a road win in Philadelphia. Put them in a position where they don't have to go to Boston right off the bat. This is where you need 27, 7, 6, over 50% shooting, a couple of steals. Can he have that kind of game? I'm not talking about score 56, but can he have that kind of game?
Boy, would I so much rather face the Knicks in the first round than the Celtics in the first round. I mean, it's night and day. And to just to put a bow on everything you're talking about, as we head into these playoffs with 2 games tonight in the West, the 2 games including the Heat Sixers in the East tomorrow. We were talking about this a little bit off air, Ethan, that the Heat are actually out of the 4 underdogs tonight and tomorrow. The Heat are the largest of those underdogs. So that is the team that Vegas or the betting public has the least faith in getting it done. The Heat are 4.5-point dogs. The Bulls are 3.5 point, the Hawks are 3.5-point underdogs against the Bulls. And you mentioned a couple of lines for tonight. The Lakers are 1.5 dogs against the Pelicans, and the Kings are 1.5 dogs at home against Golden State.
Home.
So the Heat at plus, the Heat at plus 4.5 are the biggest dogs there.
So it doesn't sound to me like a lot of people are believing in this idea that they're just going to pick it up right now. And honestly, when you look at the results against good teams this year, that's fair. But they say they like this position, right? They say they like this position. Jimmy said, see you in June. It's not even the end of April yet. We've just passed tax day. It's too late. It's too early for this thing to end. Trust me, I don't want to get through another 12 weeks of podcasts before free agency starts. If you are who you say you are, you want the 2-year extension. Can we get 27, 7 and 6, couple of steals, over 50% from the floor, lead with your energy, let others follow. Let's see how this goes tomorrow. All right, we'll be back on Thursday here on the Five Guys. Thanks everybody here who contributed here on the chat. That's one of the reasons we do it. We like to feed off some of these comments. Tonight, 5 on the floor. Will Manso joins. We're putting Will through it. Will's at what was it? Heat practice. He's going to Panthers game. He's leaving the Panthers game. He's doing a podcast with us. Hardest working man in show business. Will's going to join us tonight. All right. Have a good day, everybody.